Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's session around not eligible for PDD, now what, as an online series. Today's session applies to folks who are eligible for PDD and who are also not eligible for PDD. And we will be talking about accessibility at the University of Alberta for students and what that could look like. I'll be turning off my video due to bandwidth issues, but we'll be continuing this conversation. Dr. Wendy Doughty is our speaker today. She is the Assistant Dean for Student Access at the University of Alberta. Her pronouns are she and her. And Dr. Doughty, without further ado, I want to hand over the mic, if you will, to you, so you can maybe give maybe a longer description of the faculty that you work for and what your role is, and what is it that you'd be touching upon today?
Thanks, Ahana. This is a welcome opportunity for me, and thank you for those that are joining us. And first thing I would like to say is you do not need to refer to me as Dr. Doughty. My first name is Wendy, so please use that freely. I am absolutely comfortable with that and would actually prefer it in terms of working with people. Just a little bit of background for me in terms of where I'm coming from. My first experience working with persons with disabilities was when I was 16, and I volunteered in my home community at Large House. And that was a very special opportunity for me, and I think it shaped the direction of my life in terms of how things unfolded. I didn't start out in the field of education, but I ended up in the field of education, which I'm sure my school teachers would laugh about because they all thought I should have been a teacher. But I ended up being one that worked with adults instead of children. And throughout the course of that career, I've been worked at Grant MacEwan for 18 years. I've been at the U of A for 10 years. And in the interim period between those, I also worked as an independent consultant. So I've had the privilege and opportunity to work with community organizations and post-secondary institutions, and somehow have always had a connection to programming, resources, and supports for students that need those supports to succeed. And so it's really been a part of my life throughout my entire career. I also spent 9 years on the board of Goodwill Industries of Alberta, and I spent 6 of those as chair. And that again was a terrific opportunity and is still a very fond memory in my heart. And someday I may end up going back onto the board again. We'll see how life transpires. So my role at the university is I work in the Dean of Students office. And this is the office that provides all kinds of services to students at the U of A, including counseling services, the medical clinic, resident services, academic strategies and supports, we have social workers within our team, and it's also where we house what is known as the Accessibility Resources Unit at the university. So previously I was overall in charge of that area of programming. I've had some shifts in the last year where I'm working more at the policy level and not working at as much in the front line level, and we're interacting with students and families in the same way. However, I still take, if someone says, oh, there's an opportunity here, would you like to do it? I grab onto it. So that's exactly how I ended up here this evening with you, because I said, I don't care at 7 o'clock at night. I'm still happy to spend time with folks. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about my role at the university. Things have changed, and Sahana had told me that Gateway Association has a history of a connection to U of A, because U of A was actually the first post-secondary institution in Alberta that did substantive work to support students in the community and in their learning. And so in 1980, we had one staff member, and that was Marian Paseo, who later became Marian Paseo Nicely, who unfortunately passed away several years ago. I had the privilege of working with Marianne as at that time I was at MacEwan. And so we would sit in committee meetings together and shared lots of stories and did lots of work together in terms of affecting change. In those days, we had 37 students who were registered with the office. And those students had disabilities that or conditions that were visible. And so no one would raise the question about whether or not this student should receive the support or should be given extra time to write an exam or whatever that support was. And the services were provided mainly by volunteers. I think there was one other paid staff member at that time within a year or so of Marion starting things. In 2019, and I'm using 2019 data because we're just in the midst of collecting our data for 2020 to report to the provincial government, and I don't have it all aggregated yet, so we'll work on last year's numbers. They have changed a bit, they've increased again, but what hasn't increased is in terms of staffing. We do have about 16 staff within the Dean of Students portfolio that are involved in providing resources and supports to students with disabilities or chronic medical conditions. And I'm going to use the word disability and chronic medical condition, not because those are my favorite words in any way, shape, or form, but because those are the words that we often come back to in post-secondary because we need to use that terminology in terms of students' eligibility for funding for different things. So if I weren't referencing that, I would speak more broadly, but I apologize in advance for those of you that don't like the use of those terms. That's the reason I am using them. In the year 2019, so that was between July 1st, 2018 and June 30th, 2019, we had 1,631 students registered with the office, and they were at all levels of studies. Some of them were undergraduate students, some of them were in open studies, some were doing graduate master's degrees, doctoral degrees, students in medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, law. Virtually every program on campus, we would have students who were participating in those studies who we were serving. And which 900 of those had more than one disability. And that's significant in terms of a change because if you look back at 1980, really when we identified the needs of the students, we had a primary disability and we didn't really spend a lot of time looking at what else was the reality in terms of what the student lived with in terms of ability levels. So who are eligible for the service? So I've said they have to register, they have to connect with the office. So we do have within the Academic Success Center our accessibility resources services, and students to be eligible for the services have to have a documented permanent disability or chronic medical condition. So something like a broken wrist or a broken ankle does not qualify them to access services. In those cases, they would go back to their faculty, to their student services unit within their faculty or program area, and perhaps another student or a graduate student will help them out in that way, but we don't provide support for students with temporary disabilities. The only exception, not the only, but one exception that comes to mind to that is if someone had surgery or had concussive injury where the likelihood that a permanent disability could result in a later point in time, we may be able to provide services to that student right now instead of waiting until it transitions to that permanent disability or condition. The documentation has to be provided by an appropriate medical professional or other professional. That documentation is kept in accessibility resources. It is not shared with faculty members. It is not shared with the registrar's office. It is not shared with anyone. And it does not appear anywhere on transcripts. Sometimes students are afraid it's going to say on their transcripts for their marks that they're getting that, oh, and this student has a disability. Absolutely not. What we do with that documentation is we convey then to their instructors, their lab leaders, other people that they're interacting with. What are the functional limitations? What do we need to support for this student to do well? But the diagnosis is never, ever shared on that one. And that's one of the reasons that we want students to work with us, because sometimes students can feel obligated or to share information about their situation with a faculty member or someone else. And we want to ensure privacy, that they don't feel they have to disclose that, and also that they don't get caught in a situation that by disclosing that, it might make life more challenging in terms of getting the faculty member to work with us than if they had not found out the nature of the diagnosis. So any debate about whether or not this student deserves the accommodations and the resources that are provided is not between the student and the faculty member, or which I'm using to describe the person who's instructing the class. The documentation needs to be current. Usually we look at about a 5-year window on that. And if, for instance, someone has had a psychoeducational assessment and it was done in junior high or early on in high school, we may ask for it to be done again. And if the student is a resident of the province of Alberta, they will be eligible to have that assessment done at no cost to them or to their family. The province of Alberta has generously supported that for many years. We hope that continues. But what we know is over time, the level of support from government has shifted in terms of what they will cover and what they will not cover. And I'm hoping that that is something that we're able to retain. And so we also provide services to the office to both Canadian students and international students. Okay, so I said that the students must be registered to access the services, and to do that, they can contact the Academic Success Center, and that's the email, and that's the main reception area, and then it is directed to the appropriate person from there. Documentation will be reviewed, and there will be an online appointment. Online these days, because we're not on campus. We will not be on campus providing services for the fall term, and I'm not sure we're going to be on campus in the winter term either. I think the way things may play out, we'll probably be doing most of our services online through the winter term as well. So the documentation is reviewed, and then after that is done, the student has the opportunity to have an appointment with an advisor. Now, a few things sometimes that parents aren't unclear about is how that documentation is used. So the documentation, we would look at the student's individual service plan or individual educational plan. If they've had one of those throughout school, we'd look at any documentation from medical practitioners or other specialists. However, we need to look at what the student is going to be studying now, and how does the student's circumstance have the functional impact on those courses. So that means there may be some additional supports that are required for a student that weren't required in junior high and high school, or there may be some that are delivered in a different way than they were in high school or junior high. And so that's really the process of getting together that information, assessing it, and then determining how to proceed. Parents also will ask, can I be a part of that process? And yes, you can be a part of the process, but to be part of those conversations, we need the permission of the student for you to do so. If you are the guardian of the individual, then we would work with you as the guardian. But as a parent, if you don't have that guardianship order, then we would have to go through just a process of approval. And that's done. It's done on a not every student basis by any means, but we're very familiar with doing that with parents, accommodating their involvement in the process. And it's just being very clear about who's doing what in terms of what's the role of the parent, what's the role of the prospective student or a registered student, and what's the role of the advisor, in keeping those clear. So the advisor will work with the faculty members or instructors or the students living in residence to figure out how this functional impact is going to be addressed and what resources will be put in place. And then on occasion, some further assessment may be required. So I gave the example of a psychoeducational assessment that may be several years old and we want to call for a more recent one. Sometimes we also will have a call for other testing to be done. On the very odd occasion, we required or requested that a neuropsychological evaluation be done. And we've also had some vision testing and auditory testing done for some students as well. So in those cases, of course, sometimes we can't get that test done tomorrow. There's a waiting period. So what we do is we support the student based on the information we currently have. And then as soon as we have any additional information, we adjust the accommodations to reflect that. So we don't wait until all new assessments are in before we provide any supports to the student. We start those supports as soon as they're registered and as soon as we've done that initial review. And then as needed, we will adjust over time. The same may happen with students that in their first year, they may choose to have certain accommodations and utilize them. And as they feel more comfortable and develop their own skills, they may, over the course of your university studies, reduce the number of tools they're using. So for example, they may say, I don't want, we've had some students who haven't used interpreters or have used interpreters for a while and then have gone with CART reporting instead, or now with online and closed captioning. We've had some students who have said they don't need that support. So there's some variances that can occur, and it's all on an individual basis in terms of how we're coming to those conclusions. So things have changed in the years that I've been involved, and one of the most exciting and positive things for me is that we do see more students coming to post-secondary education. At one time, we didn't see students going on to junior high. We didn't see them completing high school. And now I think in terms of looking at the ability and potential for students, we've moved quite far ahead in terms of looking at post-secondary education as an option. We do have students who have more complex diagnoses. And just when I think I've kind of seen just about every diagnosis, a new one will come in. So that's important that our staff are up to date in terms of those changes. And we've seen many students with more than one diagnosis. Very common for students to have two diagnoses that they're living with and working with the functional impact of. In some cases, there are students with more than two. And certainly right across the province, and I would say that this would be reflected if you heard from anybody in a post-secondary institution in the province of Alberta and probably in Canada, these points would be the same. But the fourth point is an increase in the number of students with mental health diagnoses. So that is the largest proportion of students that we serve are students with mental health diagnoses. For some, that's their primary diagnosis. For some, it's their secondary or third, tertiary, or fourth diagnosis, but very, very common. And there's this growth in what we see as hidden disabilities or conditions. So chronic medical conditions that you can look at a student and you have no idea that they have Crohn's. You have no idea that they have a heart condition. You have no idea that they have rheumatoid arthritis, those types of things. With mental health, again, there are some behaviors that may suggest that there is something in play, and there are others that don't. And so in working, I think when I think about challenges over time as things have changed, it's working with people who are working with the students to say, this is legitimate. There is a functional impact for this student. It doesn't matter that you can't see it or you don't understand why they need time and a half or double time to write their final exams or their assignments, why they need a note taker. That's not yours to question. We have a legal and ethical and moral duty to provide that support. What we will work with you is how we make that happen successfully in your classroom, for your assignments, for your exams. And that's our work day in and day out. It's getting better, but as with any organization, we have new people coming in all the time, and not everybody has had any exposure or had exposure to many of these things. So it's new learning for them. And so we take that positive educational approach and we coach them and we work with them. And if they don't follow instructions, then as we have to, we will take that higher within the organization in terms of the individual being held accountable for that. However, it's our daily work. It never stops. And I don't think, I'd love to say there'll be a day when we don't do that work, but honestly, I don't think that day will ever come. But I think the day may come because of universal design applications. It won't be as challenging in terms of finding those solutions. So available accommodations, we still use that word accommodations because again, our government funder, which is Alberta Advanced Education, uses that for reporting, uses that for giving us funding. So lots of work with students around academic strategies. That may be taking tests, that may be dealing with procrastination, that may be study skills, that may be how to read and comprehend very complex text or very large volumes of material. It may be how to answer a multiple choice exam. It may be how to write a compare and contrast question on an exam. There's all kinds of things that come in play there. Writing, some students need some support for writing, and that could be said generally across the student population. Many students entering university now do not have the writing skills that one would like to see as they come from high school. And so those writing supports are being accessed by many students. And communication supports. So if a student is having difficulty working in a group environment or communicating with a professor or preparing to give a presentation in a class, developing a PowerPoint presentation for a class, we can work with the students to support in that way. So some of that work is done in the format of workshops, which are, we don't have, they're online now, but they're still fairly small groups. And some of that work is done in one-on-one consultations. Adaptive technology assessment and training. Some students will need assistive technology to support their learning. So we have a person who does that assessment of the individual and then helps train that individual to become familiar with software, hardware, and other resources. Alternate format course materials and exams. For some, that's Braille. For some, that's different font size or type. For some, that's different colored papers that are used to print exams. And the same thing with textbooks. So we work with the faculty members to determine what parts of the textbook are most important for the course, and those are the areas we focus on that. And then communication support. We do have students who are deaf and severely hard of hearing, and we contract both sign language interpreters and CART reporters to provide those services. And recently, and the last 3 years, we haven't had any students accessing interpreters, and this year we have 2 that are accessing interpreters. So that's kind of an interesting change for us. So how many exams? So this includes midterms, weekly quizzes, and final exams. In the past year, in 2019, 12,128 in a year. So quite a bit of work, and there's not a big staff that is doing that. We also provide support for students going out on co-op. So if they're in engineering or business where they may be going on a co-op or work experience opportunity, we work with field placement for students in education and other faculties as well. Note taking. Historically, we have used fellow students as volunteer note takers for students. In some cases, we've had professional note takers, and that's determined on the basis of the need of the student and the complexity of the program of study. We are now looking at doing more online resources to support note taking, and those are working out quite well. And then also recording of lectures and a lot of other things, ergonomic, adjustable height desks, tables, ergonomic chairs, different lighting, the list goes on for those. And so on campus, when we were running exams on campus, in the mornings, we'd be running across campus with our cart with the lamps and the white noise machines and the lumbar supports and the whatever was needed for the people writing in that room. We were going over and getting those set up. So it's a busy time when it's exam time. Now that we've moved online and exams are being taken remotely, we're not getting that work out of going across campus at 7 in the morning through the snow piles, as I speak from personal experience helping out during that time period. And we're doing it all online. And then just the difference between universal design for learning and accommodation. And many of you may already be familiar with universal design for learning. I always compare this to if you have a house and you renovate it, it's kind of like accommodations. You do the best you can with what you have, and you often discover something else along the way. Universal design for learning is you had that house, you drew up the plans, you picked everything. So it's truly your choice. You proactively planned it. So when we think of the direction we're shifting from, we are moving more towards looking at universal design for learning, which really helps all learners. So a lot of times when we think of universal design, we think of physical design, and we think of things like nosing on steps, and that helps people who have visual impairments. It helps other people who might have vertigo for whatever reason. It helps young children who then know that's the bottom end of a step by seeing that marker across it. So really with universal design for learning, what we're doing is providing that opportunity for the whole community. So for example, if we were doing universal design for learning in terms of examinations, instead of sending some students who needed time and a half to write that exam to another location to be invigilated or monitored by other people, they can stay in their classroom, and the whole class has that opportunity for the extended time. So examples of this within the K-12 system are departmental exams. We're now using universal design for learning principles. Students can take that extended time to do their exams. They do not need to provide any evidence of disability or functional impact of disability to access that. And this just is some more examples in terms of ways you can look at accommodation versus universal design for learning. So you'll see for the note taking, we are moving in that direction with online notes, captioning, video streaming, live streaming, because we're having both real-time lectures and we're having recorded lectures and materials. So we're doing both of that. Electronically available readings, we're trying to work more with publishers so that we can actually have electronic versions, which are much easier to alternate format on than if we have a print version to deal with. The same for video materials. And then in terms of students experiencing writing difficulties, historically and even as recently as last winter, we had students, scribes for some students. We had adaptive technology applications for some of those students. And now we're really working with faculty to look at, are there other ways that assessment can be done? And I would say since March, in my work with faculty, the biggest change has been in assessment. So for an institution that has been pretty traditional in terms of how it has assessed students, they've made inroads in that regard. We still have a policy that a 30% final assessment must be done. However, that is even under review right now in terms of seeing if we have to still go with that as we move forward. what we have found is having smaller assessments spread over the course of a term reduce the anxiety of students and actually are very supportive of their learning as well, because they're applying the material in pieces, in modules, instead of waiting for that big cumulative, all brought together circumstance in the final exam at the end of the term. And then just to also let you know, we do have a code of student behavior at the University of Alberta. Every post-secondary institution has this, and all students are expected to comply with that. And that's another reason why when students are registered with accessibility resources, if there are situations where a student's actions may be interpreted as aggressive, but really that was not the intent. It is merely the way they communicate. Then we can work to help gain that understanding. If students, so there's under the Code of Student Behavior, there are academic misdemeanors, and there are also non-academic matters. So academic misdemeanors is plagiarism, copying someone else's work is an example of that. Having someone else write the paper for you, be that your mom or your friend or your brother or your sister, looking over at someone's results in an exam, going online and submitting your exam questions to a platform where it will be answered for you, downloading answers off the internet, taking someone else's PowerPoint presentation or paper they wrote for a certain class from the internet and claiming it as your own, are all examples of that. And non-academic matters may be things like aggressive behavior, damaging physical property, threat of harm to others, stalking behavior, cyber stalking, those types of things. The most common areas for misbehavior are really on the academic side as opposed to the non-academic side. And students are certainly made aware of what the expectations are and cannot use the rationale that I didn't understand that or I didn't know that, because it is clearly communicated to the students. And so what can you do if your son or daughter is going to be attending post-secondary? I say this to every parent, and as a parent, I had two daughters that went through post-secondary and it wasn't always easy for them. The most important thing you can do is support your son or daughter. You know them, you know what's normal behavior for them, you know when they're not behaving the way that you're accustomed to. We don't know that as their teachers, as their advisors. So you are someone that can help by keeping those lines of communication open, have those conversations with your student. And one of the things, any student, it's an age thing. Virtually every student coming to U of A thinks, oh, I have to solve my problems on my own. And they're hesitant to ask for help. So often what parents are helpful with is helping direct their student to those resources and help kind of guide them to that. Because they're afraid, they feel they should have all the answers and everything under control. And if things aren't going well, they tend to not want to share that with other people. And that's why I think just keeping the communication open is important. Many students will tell their parents about the things they did well on, and this is the same in kindergarten to grade 12, but they won't talk about where they're struggling or where they're having difficulties. So if you can have normal conversations with your student about what are they learning, what was exciting, what was challenging, what was shocking, who are they meeting in their classes, those types of things are really supportive communication for any parent to have with any student. And I think that is the end of my slides. So I'm going to stop the share and
Awesome.
I'm back.
Thank
And
you.
there were
Thank you,
some
Wendy.
other There were some other questions as well that were written, that were kind of embedded in the advertising. And I'm going to have fun now chatting with Hannah around questions and other
Mhm.
questions you come up with. I really look forward to, because this is my favorite part of ever working with students or groups, are the questions. That's where the
Awesome.
real learning happens.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very informative. And I would like to ask our audience members if they have any questions first. Julie, Michael, Shauna, and others, do you have any questions that you'd like to bring forth at this time? I believe I have unmuted everyone on my end. Um, as people collect their thoughts, yeah, Julie has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi,
Yes.
Julie.
Hi, my daughter Ella, she did not want to, she's 22 and
Yes.
she has high functioning autism.
Yes.
Made a couple of attempts at post-secondary, but not successful so far. So she was discouraged from attending this webinar because she, um, you know, uh, it's just trying to get the right support for her, the right fit.
Right.
And she lacks the confidence to think that, you know, she could succeed at the U of A.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Autism is common, very common, and we work with a lot of students that is affects their learning, and we work with them a lot around communication. Some of the challenges they will face will be things like not feeling comfortable speaking up in class, not feeling comfortable engaging in interactions with other students if they're doing group work, those types of things. Those are some of the things that come top of mind. And there's other situations as well. But you've touched on something that's really important, Julie, and that's the confidence building, because there is that sense, that tendency to withdraw and go inward. What we do know it is autism has absolutely nothing to do with intellectual capacity. The students are very bright and can do very well. It's just getting that support. And with many of those students, we see if the supports are given appropriately in the first year, then as they progress through their program, the confidence is growing and they're not touching base with us as often. But when they do have a question, they know they can come back again on that one. So I would say there is hope. The real important thing is making that connection with the advisor and that fit, because it starts with trust. And if we can get Ellie trusting in that, that will be helpful on that one. And I think too, she's made a couple of attempts, Julie, did you say, at post-secondary?
Actually,
Or
just one. She
just
did
one?
she went to Center High to try to
Oh,
upgrade.
okay.
And she started an online program with Mount Royal. But,
Okay.
you know, she doesn't want, yet she needs some to sort of help her organize herself. And the
Right.
problem was the procrastination and disorganization with online learning.
Yeah, yeah. And we've, that's one of the challenges we faced at U of A, as well as working with online learning. So if I looked at the workshops that have been done since April and the consultations that have been done with students since April, there's an peak, there's an increase in the number of students we've been working with, and exactly those because of online learning. So we've learned as we've gone along on that. So that's, yeah, I don't give up hope. I mean, I know students that have walked across the stage with incredible academic achievements and graduate degrees, and that diagnosis has not stopped them. It's just getting that connection is really, really important.
So Um, what does the support look like? Like, is there for Ella, one of the things she would need is sort of a weekly check-in with a learning coach sort of thing?
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah.
you.
So we have little communities of learners that we'll pull together to do, like we have some weekly things that are follow-ups. We would have some learning resources for her as well. There's some workshops on things like, there is a workshop on procrastination. There is one on organizing, and even, this sounds very basic to many of us, but I think lots of students don't know about the value of a calendar and actually planning things out in little pieces. They just see, oh, I have to get this done, but they don't know how to break that down. And then when they have a couple of things on the go, it gets even more complex. And then they just kind of get overwhelmed. And the response then is to do nothing because it's too frightening to try to figure this one out. Things we deal with daily with students on that one.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So I think the important thing is she's passionate. She's at least interested, if not passionate, at what she's learning. That's one of the keys.
Mhm.
If it's something that she's not, that's why I asked the number of experiences, because sometimes not students in general, how they make that decision in terms of what they want to study, sometimes it's influenced by their grades in high school. Sometimes it's influenced by their friends. Sometimes it's influenced by a childhood dream. Sometimes that's what we are in this family. We're engineers or we're teachers or whatever. So the most important thing for students is to find that space where they're passionate about what they're learning. And that makes all the difference. But definitely in terms of supports, we've got them available on that.
And do you have anybody who, like a student advisor who could help her
Yeah.
sort of choose her route, or what?
No, we don't get into that.
Okay.
That business we don't get into, Julie.
Okay.
But
I know
certainly,
that with Norquest, for example, they will do that sort of thing.
yeah, because because of the level of programming they do that. We don't do that at the university because there's so many programs. They change all the time. I worked for 7 years. I ran the program for students who failed their first or second year and were trying to do remediation to get back in. And my predecessor used to pick out courses for them. And I said, no. I said, I don't want to, you've already had a little blip in your road, a little detour. We don't want me to create another detour by ill-informing you. So the student did the research in terms of what they were interested in and worked with the faculties to find that out.
Okay.
Yeah. Might even be worthwhile for Ellie to connect. There's a really great person you could talk to in the Career Center. Mm-hmm. And her name is Karen Unger. And it's Karen.Unger.
Sorry, I'm just opening up my phone here.
Okay.
To write it down.
No problem.
Okay.
Karen, spelled the usual way. Mm-hmm. Dot Unger, UNGER, and then at ualberta.ca. Why I suggest you connect with Karen is she used to work in accessibility resources. She's currently working on an initiative for students with disabilities in the Career Center. Karen also has a lot of experience in working with students with autism.
Okay.
That was the work she did before leaving Calgary and coming back home to Edmonton. So I think, and Karen's always willing to help and give direction. So let her know I sent you, I'll actually send her an email as well and say, Karen, I'm sending you someone. But I think it would be really great if you and Ella can talk to her. I think that, and she's very energetic and dynamic, and I think that would be a good fit, just to at least start that conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. There, we got a custom solution.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Julie, for your question. But as Julie was asking a question, I had a couple of questions for Julie. How was the application process on your end, Julie, to fill out the application for Ella? How did she find it? How much did you help her?
to apply for that program at Mount Royal?
Yeah.
Oh, she's capable of doing that. It's
Okay.
not a problem. It's more the, for her, it's more the overwhelming difficulty with organizing herself, and also her fear of writing essays and lots of fears and anxiety.
And we do have writing supports available as well, Julie. So if that's something, because again, the challenge with the writing is getting the ideas, and getting the ideas organized is often where that first block is for the students. And so those supports are available as well.
Okay, thank you.
And are there, Wendy, are there supports for, say, someone like Ella to even organize the online, like other accommodations on how to organize their coursework and their online classes and the
That's what
schedules
the advisor would work with Ella on that in terms of providing that support.
And the one thing you said that may not be available is for Ella to do a little bit of a kind of a passion search, like what do I want to study in.
That's why I think it would be good to talk with Karen as well, because that's the philosophy we use in terms of career. And I think that sometimes that conversation about what do you want to do in life? What would you like your day to be like? What would you like? Do you want to work with people? Do you not want to work with people? Do you want to do research? Do you want to discover things? Do you want to be in a lab? Do you want those types of things sometimes help too, because then the student kind of goes, how does this fit? And we've been working, we actually had a couple of communication workshops we were doing through the term as well, through the Career Center with students, and most of them, many of them were on the spectrum, and we were helping them in terms of interview questions for summer jobs, for part-time jobs, for those kinds of things as well, encouraging them to look at opportunities to volunteer or have work experience that would help feed into what they were looking at doing. Because we look at career as not the thing you do after you walk across the stage and convocate, really trying to get students to get engaged and throughout their time in university do different things that all help broaden their experience, whether that's work, whether that's a volunteer experience. So there's lots of job shadow and volunteer experiences and things too. So if somebody's curious about, what does a dentist do, or what does a veterinarian do, or what does an accountant do, we have those kind of opportunities as well.
Awesome. Shauna, Michael, did you want to talk about your particular situations and then consult with Wendy? No pressure. You can take your time. You can take your time.
Yes, thank you for hosting this. I have learned a great deal. I kind of took a roundabout route to end up back where I am, and I'm sort of assessing where might I end up going with all the collaborative work that I, as an autistic adult who lives with high-functioning autism, might end up trying to take the collaborative work I've been doing with Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and particularly their undergraduate medical education office around access to health and dental care for those living with invisible disabilities. And I realize that at some point I may end up going back to the university and studying possibly fine arts or possibly other stuff. And I'm just wondering, in the open studies program, how long a period of time can you spend in there before you have to make a decision about what you want to study, I guess, is the first question I would have.
Hey, Michael, I'll do the first question, and then
Sure.
if you've got another one, we'll just kind of break it down a bit. So for others on the call, who may not know what is open studies and what are we talking about. So open studies means that you are enrolled taking some courses at the University of Alberta, but you have not been at this point formally accepted into a program of study or a faculty. And the maximum number of courses a student can take in open studies during a term is two courses. And how long you can stay in there, some students have been in there a long time in terms of that. It is where I suggest open studies, especially for students or parents of students who are thinking, can I do this? Like, is university even possible for me? It's a smaller course load to start with. And you can still get supports in terms of accessibility resources, no problems with that. But you don't want to stay in open, if you want to move into a program of study and be accepted in something, you don't want to spend a long time in open studies, because that gets you farther away from getting into that program and getting the course requirements met for that program as well. Michael, do you know the folks in the Learner Advocacy and Wellness Office in medicine?
I'm sure that some of the people that I am collaborating with would have no problem pointing me in that direction.
Yeah. What I also would suggest, though, because I've worked with Mel Lewis in the past, so I thought you might know Dr. Lewis as you've done the advocacy work. Again, I mean, I think sounds like you probably have quite a fascinating collection of experiences and knowledge and wisdom, and are looking at some different options in terms of returning to your studies. And again, Karen might be a good person to connect with in terms of, so the same person I gave the connection to for Julie, now I'm going to have to buy Karen chocolate for sure. But Karen definitely is very helpful, and she comes from that perspective of working with individuals with autism. She has worked as an accessibility advisor. She works in the career area, and the program she's doing right now is looking at career opportunities for alumni or current students, but also Karen can help direct you to some folks too, in terms of helping you kind of think about what is it you have in your toolkit right now or your basket, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and then how does that kind of translate into studying? Like where might that fit?
Yes, interesting, because right now I am a community member that through a search really to find suitable oral health care just kind of ended up in this interesting collaboration, and it's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. And I'm just at this point thinking about, well, where do I want to go with it versus where does it want to take me?
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for being a community advocate. Thank you very much. We need more of those.
Yes, I am discovering that it is something that is needed, and I just kind of ask the right people the right questions at the right time, and have developed this interesting relationship as a result.
Good.
It's
All
mutually
right.
rewarding for me and for those that I'm collaborating with.
Okay. Do we have another question as well, Sahana?
So Shauna had to step out, but I'm just curious. Wendy, like in terms of um, the faculty, there are definitely courses. What are some accommodations made within the faculty in terms of, let's say there's a 200-person classroom, and that subject matter is relevant and important for the student, but the size of the classroom, right? So on one end, the university has its limitations on what size classes they want to have, because a lot of people subscribe to that particular class and register for that class. And then you have the student that needs accommodations for whom the class size is too big, and it's not a good experience for them. So
Right.
what happens in those situations where we can still manage, but not, maybe the answer is not the student doesn't attend the class, right? So
Right.
what could that be?
Right. So the advisor would really have to look at what the functional limitations are. So for instance, I mean, I've taught on campus in 3 faculties over many years, and I've had students that need to be on their own at the front of the classroom, and they can't have other students sitting with 3 desks within a 3-desk distance on either side of them, because they don't feel comfortable in that circumstance. And that's been accommodated, and it's been accommodated in a way. I mean, the easy part of that is the front row seats are never in high demand anyways, but being able to do that, getting the student into the classroom and doing some designating of areas on that is important. If a student, we had a student who could not attend classes because of a mental health challenge. And so we had note taking and recording of lectures for that student. And then the student interacted with the professor or the teaching assistant weekly, online, not in person. And this was before COVID. So we did that accommodation. So there are ways of working with that. But again, that's why it's so imperative that the student needs to be registered with accessibility resources, because to try to have that conversation between a student and a parent and a faculty member is not going to be successful. So we want to respect the privacy of the individual. We want to focus on the functional limitation and figure out how we accommodate that. So the professors involved had no idea why the student needed this accommodation. That was never disclosed. It was, how do we work together to make this work? And we did.
Interesting. So have you seen any instance where, the professors, as you said, they don't really, are we saying that professors don't understand accommodations? And so really that has to be a conversation that happens during registration, so that people who know how to create accommodations are the ones that are dealing with it.
Right.
Has that ever been challenged by a student or a parent? Did they have a valid point?
So sometimes it's a fair bit of conversation with the instructor in terms of saying, you have to do this. Most people don't like being told they have to, but we have legal obligations, we have moral obligations, we have ethical obligations. And so it's not you're doing this because you're a nice person, it's you're doing it because it's the expectation. That's what the university has committed to. On some occasions, we have to elevate those conversations a bit. If somebody is very resistant, then it means going to their supervisor and working that through. But we do work them through. Resistance is futile. It does get worked through. But again, if the students take this on their own, which sometimes they do, and then come to us later and say, well, I'm having troubles getting whatever, that you can kind of imagine now the conversation is starting out not from a positive place, because the instructor has already interacted with the student. There has been some disagreement about the need, and now we need to go back in and we need to create a safe space for the student, and we need to affect change in the thinking and actions of the professor. So that's why we say we're here to do that. And I know with some students, they say, I'm okay, I'm fine talking about my disability and my limitations with anybody. And that's good. But sometimes doing that actually doesn't serve the student well. And so that's why we say that's our job. That's our job, to work with you to make sure you get what you need.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I completely understand why that student might want to do that themselves. And at the same time, I wish professors at the same time, it is some responsibility on them as well to be informed, to be disability confident, right?
Right.
Because
And
we are ultimately, all of us are working, we learn, we go to school to study or what have you, or take hands-on course where we learn a skill or a trade. All of it is to go be employed, because a meaningful employment is one of the best markers of inclusion, right? And so these are they are professors, but they could be also be employers. They could hire somebody in their block to mow their lawn. They could hire someone to tutor their child. Like everybody's a potential employer. And I'm wondering about the responsibility of civil society to educate themselves and be more disability confident. And that is
so
definitely
I'm gonna
something we
add
need.
2 comments to that. One is because it just kind of made me think as you were talking about employment and ability levels. We also have a number of scholarships and financial awards that are specifically available to students with various disabilities. Some are more general, such as a learning disability. We have one where the student or a member of the student's family has schizophrenia as a diagnosis. There's some other requirements in that award as well. But we want to work with students to make sure they are aware of those awards. Students can also apply for general awards and scholarships and academic honors. And if, because of the functional impact of their chronic medical condition or disability, a maximum course load for them is less. So by definition, a full course load is 3 courses. However, some programs such as engineering have a requirement for 6 courses. And so we have to work with them in terms of accommodations for students in engineering, in terms of reducing that course load. But if a student was only able to take a course load of 3 courses in a program that maybe had a requirement for 4 or 5, or possibly 2 courses if their minimum requirement was 3, we put an indicator if the student's registered with us and that is a functional limitation and it is based on that documentation, then the registrar's office puts an indicator on the student's file. It doesn't appear anywhere on their transcripts. Nobody knows. It's just kind of a financial flag. It's a financial flag for eligibility for awards. So if they have that flag, then they are considered equivalent to full-time. So it opens up that possibility. And that's one of the things I've worked really hard on the last couple of years, is to make sure that students who have that reduced course load are not being lost in the list of potential recipients for awards. So we've done a lot of work in that regard, and we do a lot of promotion of those awards, and I lead the adjudication of the awards we are responsible for each year. And it is for the people who think somehow having a disability means you can't do well in school. I just wish they had the privilege of seeing what I see in terms of academic standing, leadership, volunteer engagement, what fine human beings these students are, and what they're doing balancing a considerable challenge in living and health conditions that may go up and down. And I just, when someone says that, I just want to just take them and say, do you know that there are students who have documented disabilities and chronic medical conditions that have a perfect 4.0 GPA at university? And I do see that. And so I think that's just important to remember that just because they may have a reduced course load doesn't mean they should be excluded from those kind of opportunities. So for parents or for students, just keep that in mind. There are those kind of resources that are available. There's one for spinal cord. There's several for learning disabilities. Can't think of them all off the top of my head. There's another one that's more mobility related, but there's lots there. So to keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to just throw in there, I might have lost my thought now as I did that. You were talking about, professors. So how do we educate the university community about the needs? Historically, we've done through workshops through Center for Teaching and Learning, and so I have done those for several years. I think though now in the work that's being done around the equity, diversity, and inclusivity framework for the university, it's now raising more emphasis on we need to have all of our staff, whether they're teaching or sitting at a front desk or whatever they're doing in the university community, aware and understanding and supportive of EDI or equity, diversity, and inclusivity. So I think there's probably going to be some, I would guess at some point, some fairly strong push for people to do some workshops. When I've done workshops, I often feel I'm working with those that are kind of like preaching to the choir. They already kind of know and understand and they just want to learn more. But as an institution, we need to make more people aware to help that shift. And as I had said earlier before we got on the call, the challenge is it's a moving community. So some people are there for decades. Some people are there for one class, to teach one class a term. And people there's a turnover in staff, but we think are looking at better ways of making that part of the culture and part of the understanding of our university community. Yeah, Julie?
Oh, yeah, while you were talking, I was just I'm thinking about my friend who is visually impaired.
Yes.
So she's doing open studies at Norquest.
Yep.
And she gets a certain amount of time allotted one-on-one with a teaching or an educational assistant.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that is available?
Yeah, educational
like
assist
at U of A.
So there's a couple of different options. It depends on what the need is. The first thing we usually try to attach the student to is a learning strategist. And the reason we do that is that skill set and working in that way is going to go right across all the courses the student is taking. So things like organizing yourself, how to prepare for a paper, how to write different kinds of exams, procrastination. That's not specific to a particular course. That's right across the whole piece of studies. In some cases, the student may have a processing challenge, for instance, and maybe math is difficult, or maybe reading provides challenges, or maybe there's a short-term, maybe the memory, there's something going on in terms of memory capacity. In those cases, we might assign the student an educational assistant to work with them on that. or we may work with a tutor. So for instance, a student who was having processing challenges in math and had that all through school, had a requirement to complete a math course as part of the course of study in university. And we can't exclude that requirement. We can't say, because you have this functional impact, you don't have to take this course. So we had to find a way to support that student to get through that course. So that was in the case the student was had a tutor and also had additional sessions with a strategist. And those were happening every week on that. The tutor was meeting with the student twice a week on that. But sometimes people think the answer is, oh, you get a tutor for everything. That's not necessarily the best answer. Tutors are subject specific. So we need to look at what is subject specific and what is more generic across the whole learning piece on that. And some students will have an educational aid. They need assistance with toileting or movement. We have students who have to be monitored in terms of seizures, those types of things. We have support animals that students bring on campus. So we have a process of getting those cleared and working with faculty members around that. Yeah, there's never, no day's the same. Every day's different on that. So there's lots of options there in terms of the resources that are available.
And just one more thing. Ella says that it's difficult for her to work at home because there's too many distractions in the house.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What is with COVID, are there places on campus now that?
There are places on campus, but very few. Oh. So the two, which library? Let me think for a minute. Cameron Library, I believe, is open. I think it's Cameron Library right now that's open. And we do have students studying on campus. We have just gone through a process of determining what students and faculty will be on campus for fall. It was a very formal process. Everybody had to submit their request for the exception because things were to happen online. It's approved now for a total of about 4,100 people to be on campus. That's never all on one given day at the same time. And the students who are on campus are students who are working in the labs doing research. The researchers are on campus. Some faculties require specific equipment as part of their instruction. So radiation technology, for example, their simulators or all their equipment and simulators are in the basement of a building. So those students can't do that online. Some students are coming on campus only for a particular lab requirement, but I must admit, I was just amazed with the Faculty of Engineering, which of course has lots of labs involved in their program, and they have virtually figured out a way in every area of engineering to deliver things online. And they have worked very hard at doing that. So it can be done with a few exceptions. Your comment about the student who's blind, actually on Friday, I'm going back on campus for the first time since the end of March. And the reason I'm going on campus is we're doing a walkthrough of the law building with a couple of students, one who is legally blind, and we have another staff member who's coming in to join us who is deaf. And I'm not sure the other two students what their functional limitations are, but we are actually doing a walkthrough because their student association had put forward a proposal to the dean of the faculty saying this building was it's probably built in the 1960s. It's dark. It doesn't have a lot of things that really would support someone who is blind or support someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. We'd like you to see some changes. So that's what we're doing is we're going through with the university architect, and we'll all be masked up. There'll be an interpreter with a visor instead of a mask, and everybody else, the building's in lockdown, so we're the only people there. And yeah, so I've kind of worked myself through feeling, am I going to feel comfortable? And I think I'm okay. I'll have my mask and we'll be socially distanced. But I just added that certainly that's one of the things I work with a university architect on around accommodations in terms of physical spaces. So things like designated washrooms, door openers, those types of things when we get requests for those as well. So. Unfortunately, we don't have a big pot of gold to do a lot of changes, but we do what we can, and whatever funding we can get, we apply for to make sure that helps help make it happen. And I went off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to let you know that it's not just about the classroom, it's about a whole bunch of other things too, in terms of that.
Thank you.
Well, we've definitely gone into such different directions, and this conversation is great. And
Oh, it's good? Okay.
yeah, of course. I mean, I think, I think we're all here to learn and grow. And speaking of, I wanted to bring up the role that Gateway founding families have played with inclusive education, not just at the school level, because I think kids were not going to school past grade 7 before Gateway Family a role in that situation. But there were no young adults at post-secondary as well until Gateway decided to knock on the University of Alberta's door. Wendy, what do you remember from that time? Like, if you think about, say, the last decade and a half and just education and inclusive education, like, what are some changes you've seen and what do you anticipate in the next decade? Where will this go?
So I think one of the things we've seen is the improvement in the high school programs and the improvement in the technology that's been available to support students in high school. Sometimes we have students coming to us saying, well, I had this kind of equipment in high school. That's not what you're looking at university. So there's been some really good resources directed to the high schools. I think I like doing the school tours. We do them for a couple of schools, and the junior highs cycle through. They go to NAIT 1 year and U of A another year, and I think McEwen the 3rd year. So I always enjoy those. I enjoy the teachers and I enjoy the students. And again, just to see the diversity. I mean, I've been involved in this work for a long time, and it's really changed in terms of the students we now see succeeding. And I think that gives me lots of hope in terms of how far we've come. I think for where we get to, there's many that would say we just don't even use the word disability anymore. And really, we move away from the medical model, and we've done lots of work in that regard, but I know we keep on getting caught back in that because it's that justification. Well, you have to prove that you have such and such in order to qualify for such and such. And that isn't inclusive. That's putting people in silos and boxes and kind of labeling them. And I think universal design for learning provides more opportunity to get rid of that. There's certainly been cases already where students have contested the requirement to substantiate their mental illness. There's lots of interesting things going on in Ontario in terms of, I think because they have an active ombuds and have had one in place longer than we have in Alberta. There has been much more work done at the post-secondary level in terms of resources and websites and open access to, for instance, here's an example. And we're trying to work on this one to see if we can minimally get it going in Alberta and hopefully in Western Canada. But in Ontario, they have a system that, so let's say you had a textbook for a nursing course. Well, that nursing textbook might be used by courses in several universities or colleges. So it is alternate formatted once, and then it's put into an archive. And then the next student that comes along that needs an alternate format of that particular text doesn't have to take their textbook into somebody and get it all done. No, they have like a password that allows them to unlock that archive, and then they can access that textbook. And they can access it wherever they are in the province. They can be in the far north, they can be in the middle of downtown Toronto. It doesn't matter where they're studying. If that is the textbook, then they can do that. Whereas in Alberta right now, what we're still doing is if it's used at Mount Royal, it's also used at MacEwan and also used at Lethbridge. Each time that book's coming up for a student, we're all formatting it again. So it's those kind of things that I think really will affect change. I know there's certainly the Association for People Who Provide Services to Persons with Disabilities in Post-Secondary are, I think, now saying, okay, we need to do some more lobbying of government to do some things at the system level, because historically what they've done is said, here's your grant, this is the grant you get, this is the grant you get, this is the grant you get. But things like universal design for learning, why can't we across the province of Alberta look at one software program for note-taking? Why can't we look at one way of providing remote CART services? In that way, students too, if they're moving, and they do, you know, they might start in a smaller community and then move to a larger center to finish their degree or do a subsequent degree. Why do they have to learn a new process or a new system because they've switched? That seems kind of silly. So I would hope moving forward that we see, there's always been, I think, good collaboration between the individuals and the institutions, and they work very supportively in terms of resolving situations and sharing resources, but we haven't had that provincial kind of umbrella approach in terms of resources. It's really been kind of card shuffled out to the different partners on that. And there's inefficiencies in that too, right? Like we could get a better deal if we did that. So for instance, with the library thing that they're doing in Ontario, the University of Alberta libraries, I sit on a committee with the libraries, and one of the co-chairs of the committee, that's something she's really passionate about. She's come from Ontario a couple of years ago. She's familiar with it. And so she's just in there nudging, saying, hey, how can we do this? And how can we move forward? Yeah. So, and then there's less barriers, right? Like if the student can stay in the classroom and write with the rest of their classmates, it's not someone looking around saying, where's Mary today? Is Mary okay? And I, as the instructor, am saying, oh, no, Mary's fine. It's okay. Everything's fine. Because I'm not going to say Mary's across campus in another room writing on a double time indicator, and that's why she's not here. I'm not going to say that. I would never say that. But the students notice, right? They go, oh, Mary isn't here. What's going on? So, yeah.
Thank you for that. When we talk about inclusion, especially during COVID, and recognizing, all the agencies, just looking around us to see what does inclusion really mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how can it not be the separate, special thing, but rather something that where everybody belongs? Because that's the thing, we're all on a spectrum of ability. And so what are some COVID inspired transformations that's happened for disability inclusion at the U of A?
Good question. And I was thinking there's a video that was done, I don't know, I saw it in the 1980s, but it talked about everyone is temporarily abled. And that has never left me. I also have 2 family members that sustained injuries that created disabilities for them. So I know that personally. I think what COVID, no one ever wished for COVID. COVID forced us to change. Suddenly, within a matter of 2 days, faculty members had to convert from teaching in the classroom to having material up online and ready to deliver. And one of the concerns that we had about that was, well, if this is only like for winter and then in fall we're all back on campus again, are we going to revert to former approaches? Because just that transition alone, although for some students it created new challenges because of the functional impact of online learning, for many students and for students in general, it now provided an opportunity for captioning. It provided an opportunity for recorded lectures. So students who in the past, if they'd been ill with the flu, had to find somebody who took notes and all those types of things, now didn't need to do that, right? It was an equalizer. Everyone had access to that same resource. And then the challenge for us was for students that might be a challenging format to work in or medium to work in, how did we adjust with that one? So I think if I could say there's something good that came out of that, I think it forced people to move ahead. And many people thought, oh, I'm going to be horrible. I'm going to be boring. Students aren't going to listen, and they've learned that actually you don't have to be boring online, that you can engage with students, that students do still ask questions, and they just don't, watch the videotape on their own and not show up for conversations. So I think in many ways, teaching practices were illuminated in a different way on that. And we've done a lot of work on campus and are continuing to do work with faculty members to help them get better at online learning. And moving forward, I don't think we will go back to just classroom delivery. Even if somehow magically we found the cure and there wasn't, we had the vaccine and we had 70 or 90, whatever percentage have to be vaccinated, and whatever we did, a miracle happened and COVID was not a concern in terms of our health. I don't think we'll go back to everything happening in the classroom. And there's certainly models that post-secondaries are looking at in terms of who do you bring on campus and who need that in-class support early on, and in more senior levels, do they need that support, or can they work more independently? We always talk about in the K-12 system, you want your best teachers in the early years of education, because that's the foundation and that's where children either come to love learning or not love learning. Same thing with university. If we're doing it well, we have our best teachers in those introductory level classes, so that they're engaging people and capturing their attention and working with them to support their learning. And I think that has really, as we worked online, that has become so evident. The exceptional teachers are exceptional teachers online as well. It's, it's not stopping them, but how can we now use what we've learned to help others? So we have some people who were really good on the technology, and that was great, but maybe still had some developmental work to do with teaching. We don't require, there's lots of conversations about this over time. I don't know how many times this is cycled through. Should there be some kind of a requirement for a how to teach, like a basic education course for all university professors? And I've worked at McEwen. I helped train and orient new faculty members coming in. We did instructional skills workshops with them for years, and it was helpful. But it's NATE prescribes that, but most universities don't. So you could be really brilliant researcher, you could be really brilliant in your field and your subject matter, but if you can't convey that to students and get them engaged, then that's what good teaching is about. So I don't know. I don't know if we'll get to that point. That's come up again in terms of a requirement. And it's come up certainly the EDI piece as well, as how do we educate our campus community that it's not just a few of us that are fighting the good fight, because people get tired of doing that and often are looked to well, we'll get you on this committee because you're the person that knows about, average Indigenous studies or something. Well, that person can't be on 30 committees. It gets tiring. So that's really something I hope we see move forward on that one. This is not my theoretical time of the day. I'm an early morning person, so I think I'm droning on there with theory for a bit. Julie, did you wave with a question, or are you waving goodbye?
Well, no, I just had a comment actually while you were talking. I was thinking about in my first year at university, I was taking a French. I'm actually a teacher myself now, but I was taking a French course in first year, and the professor was clearly not very happy to be teaching this first year French class, and it was just, the delivery was terrible. And eventually, I decided, if this is the way my French learning education is going to be, I'm going to change to the Faculté Saint-Jean. So I switched my program because of, a professor who was not a very good instructor.
Yeah. Sounds like it was a good choice.
Well, yeah, it did. In the end, it was okay.
Yeah.
That's all my questions. I just want to say thank you so much. I really, I'm glad.
You're most welcome. And you've got Karen's address, email address. I'll send her an email. Say, guess what, Karen? Welcome back from holidays. You might be hearing from a few folks.
Yes, and I definitely will talk to Ella, and she's had a lot of frustration in her, good teachers and teachers that needed to learn a little more about how to support students with disabilities. So yeah, her experience in the education has been up and down, so yeah, there's a lot of anxiety. So perhaps just talking to her, real passion is music, actually, Ella.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm not sure how you guys are going to be delivering that online.
Yeah, I don't know what they actually decided. I had talked to the program chair in May, and they were thinking at that time they were actually going to hold off till winter for classes because of the performance component, right? But I don't know what they ultimately decided on that one.
Great. Well, I'm going to just say thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yes, Wendy, thank you so much. We will let you go.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you
I'm melting.
for your time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Let's also enjoy the little bit of evening we have left, and thank you.
Yes, thank you for organizing this. It was very interesting.